This is our Wind Symphony, and that was The Thunderer by John Philip Sousa. The next selection is going to be based on that previous selection. This is Symphony on Themes of John Philip Sousa, Movement 2 After the Thunderer, and let me explain. The composer of our next selection, Ira Hershon, is a known composer for Hollywood film scores such as Toy Story and The Scorpion King. But he was also nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for Symphony on the Themes of John Philip Sousa. The entire work is actually 4 movements like a traditional classical symphony, and each movement is inspired by a different John Philip Sousa march. Tonight we're going to perform the second movement of this symphony, After the Thunderer, which was inspired by the march that we just played. The Wind Symphony also played this selection at State MPA a few weeks ago, where we also received a superior rating.
Yeah.
This is Symphony on Themes of John Philip Sousa, Movement 2, After the Thunderer. plenty more where that came from. Moving on to The Marriage of Figaro. The Marriage of Figaro is an Italian comic opera that was written by Mozart, and it's considered a cornerstone of operatic repertoire and is said to be one of the top 10 most performed operas worldwide. This is the overture from the opera, which is normally played by the pit orchestra at the start of the opera before the curtain goes up. When this overture was first performed, Archibald Ferdinand of Austria said it was far too noisy and it had far too many notes. And I think some of our clarinet and woodwind players might happily agree with that statement. This is The Marriage of Figaro. lot of notes. And a fun piece to play. Our next selection is actually a choral transcription. It's titled Salvation is Created by Pavel Chesnikov. Salvation is Created is a fine example of choral literature of the Russian Orthodox Church. This was one of the very last sacred works Pavel Chesnikov composed before he was first forced to turn to secular arts by the Soviet government. Although he never heard his own composition performed, his children had the opportunity to in the years following his death. The work is a communion hymn based on synodal Kievan chant melodies. The original Russian text says, "Salvation is made in the midst of the earth, O God, Alleluia." This is Salvation is Created. We still have two more pieces to play for you, but we want to make a few announcements. Our band awards are next Friday night, a week from tomorrow, Friday, May 22nd at 7 p.m. right here in the Sebastian River High School Performing Arts Center. Hope to have all students and parents and family members here to support as we give out our end of the year awards. Also, she's out of town, not here this evening, but Miss Alberry, who's our band secretary and been our band secretary for over 10 years, is retiring at the end of this year. We're having a retirement party for her Sunday, May 31st. And it's going to be over at Sebastian River Landings at the clubhouse. It's going to start at 2 p.m. We do have a committee of parents, and they are collecting for a gift for Miss Alberry. And if you'd like to sign up for food or to give monetarily to that gift, please see Mary Kay. Where's Mary Kay? She's here. She's over there all the way on the side there. Please see Mary Kay at the conclusion of the concert if you'd like to give to Miss Alberry's gift and or help with food for that. Also, for all freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, seniors, you're off the hook. So check out our summer band camp calendar. We have a mini camp for all leadership students, all percussion students, all new guard members, June 8th and 9th from 8 to 11:30. Summer rehearsals this summer will take place on Thursdays for winds and percussion, and on Tuesdays for guard, and all the band camp dates and fall dates are already on the band calendar, so please check those out when you get a chance. On to Molly on the Shore. Percy Aldridge Granger was an Australian-born composer, arranger, pianist, and musical innovator. He enlisted as an Army bandsman and became a U.S. citizen and made many worldwide concert tours. He was a complicated, controversial figure in every facet of his life. He rebelled against the disciplines of Central European tradition and largely rejected conventional forms. Molly on the Shore is an arrangement of two contrasting Irish reels, Temple Hill and Molly on the Shore, that presents the melodies in a variety of textures and orchestrations. Granger composed this piece for strings, actually for a string quartet, in 1907, and as a birthday gift for his mother Rose. He later arranged it for wind band, which you'll hear tonight, and also for orchestra. This is Molly on the Shore. Clarinets disagree. They say that one has more notes. At this time, before they play their last selection, I would like to recognize all of the seniors in Wind Symphony. So please stand when I call your name. Not yet. Morgan Adams. Albert Alvarez. Samantha Bowman. David Bright. Brandy Brooks. Alexis Burgos. Chris Chandler. James Torma. Tianja Comer. Ben DeMars. Barrett DeMarco. Nicole Esposito. Samantha Green. Blake Hunley. Lorenzo Jefferson. Callie Creed. Caitlin Langtop. Kayla McGuinn. Colin O'Rourke. Gabriel Redmond. Alexis Remy. Eric Rowetter. Anna Scott. Jet Schaefer. Lily Shelton. Kyle Stadler. Patrick Stepanek. Jack Stevens. Ariana Thomas. Ariana Tucker. Lily Valencia. Christina Bavona. Tim Blankus. Krista White. And Davis Wilson. How about a hand for all of our seniors? Don't forget at the conclusion of this concert to see Mary Kay if you'd like to help out with Miss Alberry's retirement party. Also, we have some band parents stationed around the PAC with band Shakos. If you would like to donate to our band program in general, you can see one of those lovely ladies and donate to our band program. We would certainly appreciate that. And we're moving on to our last piece of the evening, Porgy and Bess. A little bit on George Gershwin. George Gershwin was an American composer and pianist. Gershwin's works were heavily influenced by both classical and jazz genres, and his most popular melodies are widely known. Among his best-known works are the orchestral compositions Rhapsody in Blue, which he composed in 1924, and An American in Paris, which he composed in 1928, as well as the folk opera of Porgy and Bess, which he composed in 1935. Initially a commercial failure, Porgy and Bess is now considered one of the most important American operas of the 20th century. His longest and most ambitious work, the American folk opera Porgy and Bess, premiered on October 10, 1935 at New York's Alvin Theater. The dramatic storyline is set in Charleston, South Carolina at the turn of the century and addresses the many complex issues of race. The opera is based upon the best-selling novel Porgy by DeVos Hayward, a poet from South Carolina. Gershwin's discovery of Hayward's work was the result of a long search for a story that would allow him to draw upon many kinds of music, black and white, Eastern and Western, in his composition, and then catch the rhythms of these interfusing peoples to show them clashing and bending as he brought it to the stage. In 1930, Gershwin had received a commission from the Metropolitan Opera to write a grand opera, one that was distinctly American. But knowing that its practice of not allowing African American performers would keep him from realizing his vision of an all African American cast, so he declined. Gershwin stated in a 1935 New York Times article, "Because Porgy and Bess deals with complex issues in America, it brings to the operatic form elements that have never before appeared in the opera, and I have adapted my method to utilize the drama, the humor, the superstition, the religious fervor, the dancing, and the impressionable high spirits of the race. If doing this, I have created a new form, which combines opera with theater. This new form has come quite naturally out of the material." For many years to follow, due to the unavoidable racial challenges in America, Gershwin's epic musical portrayal of Porgy would be performed with much greater frequency throughout Europe, and following World War II, amongst numerous other landmark influences it had continued to bring to the world, Porgy and Bess would become the first American theatrical performance to appear in the Soviet Union. Some 50 years after 1935, the 1935 album premiere, Porgy and Bess was finally produced and performed at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, our last piece of the evening, the overture and selections from Porgy and Bess. Now come our band captains to conduct one last time, Going Home.